Hello and welcome to our weekly Parsha Shiur with the commentary of the Alshich. This week's Parsha is the Parsha of Shoftim. Once again, the Shiur is dedicated for the Refuah Shlema of Uriah Chaim ben Chana Yehudis, and we should see that little boy be very well very soon. Again, if you'd like to sponsor the Shiur yourself for somebody who's not well, or maybe on a more happy note to mark a celebration, a bar mitzvah, a simcha, a wedding, then the address, I'm not even going to hold it up as I normally do. I hope we know by this time, yy@rabbiyyy.com. That's easy, yy@rabbiyyy.com. Now, this week's Parsha is the Parsha of Shoftim, Judges, and the Alshich, as those of you who've been with me for many Shiurim will know, very, very often takes a Kabbalistic turn. He was, after all, a Sephardi and a Kabbalist, Talmud of Ramoshe Cordovera, and the teacher of the Arizal. However, as we're going to see shortly, when it comes to this particular Parsha, then what he has to say, his analysis of the Psukim, the abnormalities, the things that seem to be wrong with Psukim, lead him to a very, very common sense, down to earth, everyday, wise piece of information on the topic of Jewish judges. But perhaps before I get to the Alshich, I should tell you a story. Many years ago, a certain town in the United States of America invited me to spend a Shabbaton there. And to say Shiurim. I was invited back, so it must have been reasonably successful. At least it was reasonably successful for some of the people in the town. When I got there, I found that the town has two Orthodox shuls. One is more modern Orthodox, very nice people, and the other is more leaning towards the yeshiva world, Haredi, as we say, and that's where I was going to be speaking. The rabbi, who was also Rosh Kollel, there's a Kollel there, had reached out to the other synagogue, the modern Orthodox synagogue, to ask them if they wanted to combine and both come together for a Suda Shlishit, the third meal of Shabbos, where I would be invited to address both synagogues together. And this provoked a particular reaction from somebody in the more modern Orthodox shul, a doctor, who was outraged, literally apoplectic at the thought of me speaking to the synagogue, in fact, from me even being in the town, which came as a big surprise, as I'd never been to this particular town at that time in my life before. I wasn't quite sure what I possibly have done to offend this person quite so much. The actual event was being sponsored by somebody who had supplied the speaking fee and the cost of me coming, etc., in celebration of his recovery, an old fellow, his recovery from cancer. And this doctor, with two other people, actually went to his house to take him to task and upset the old fellow that how dare he spend money for a Shabbaton with this dreadful YY Rubinstein character. And so he then went to the rabbi, the Rosh Kollel of the city, to lodge his formal complaint with him, which was frankly a bit of a chutzpah, saying it wasn't his synagogue, but this doctor was not short on chutzpah. And then when he did raise the complaint, he let the rabbi know exactly what Rubinstein had done that was so terrible. I'd written a book. Well, I've written lots of books, but the particular book at this time, which caused so much distress, was this book here, and it's called On the Derech, Answers to Questions That Challenge Jewish Minds. You might see in Jewish bookshops another book with a very, very similar graphic. Mine came first. I won't comment on that, but this is the book, and there are. It's been a while since I looked at this. I think 21 chapters on the classic questions, but they're all real questions that were asked to me by young people generally, who were troubled by questions like, how do we know that we're right and they're not? What is a Jew meant to think when confronted by the Holocaust? And so on and so forth. Classic questions by young people, and occasionally a couple of rabbis who didn't or weren't able to find satisfactory answers. And of course, as I think I've told you many times before, there's no more exciting sentence in the English language, or in fact in any language that I know of, than the sentence that says, I don't know. Because when somebody asks me a question and my reaction in response is, I don't know, I get very excited by that, because I don't know is an invitation to know, or to come to know. And so I always very much like, I don't know. And many of these questions dealt with in the book were questions I didn't know what the answers were and or was, and gave me a chance to research and share that with the people asking me the question. It was anyway, it was a very successful book. And so I really must reprint this one. Anyway, there is a chapter, and the chapter is chapter 11, page 90. And the chapter is called Don't Gedolim, the greats of the Jewish people. Don't go down and make mistakes just like the rest of us. And this was the thing that caused this doctor to fly into total and utter fury. So he came to the Rosh Yeshiva, who was also the Rosh Colonel, and complained bitterly that I had said that Gedolim, the greats of the Jewish people, don't make mistakes like the rest of us. The Rosh Colonel, this rabbi, was a very wise man, and he said to him, tell me, doctor, I can't remember the fellow's name, so I'm not even being diplomatic here, or tactful, not one of my greatest fortes. Tell me, doctor, have you read his book? And the doctor replied that he had not read my book. Have you read the chapter? He then pressed. I've never gone that far. That's very clever of him. No, the doctor admitted he hadn't read the chapter either. However, he said, I read part of the chapter, and I'm an endocrinologist, he said, and if anybody told me that insulin isn't an effective cure for diabetes, I wouldn't be interested in anything else he had to say. And that was that. So I was boycotted by that fellow, and sadly the shul as well, although some of the shul did come to listen to me. And someone asked me the question, having been libeled and slandered by this fellow, did I say that? And the answer is no, I didn't. And the chapter doesn't say that. In fact, had this doctor bothered to actually read the chapter, certainly more than a bit of the chapter, he would have seen that I said that infallibility is a claim that Judaism doesn't make about anybody. Even the greatest of all, Moshe Rabbeinu, made mistakes. So therefore, as a consequence of not reading it, he had caused a lot of trouble, distressed a very ill man, or somebody had been very ill recovering, and stopped two shows coming together. But this question of the greats and judges of the Jewish people, the leaders of the Jewish people, is really what the Alshich is going to deal with. And I will come back and quote you something from that controversial chapter. As long as you don't boycott me next week or put me into quarantine, and we'll see what we shall see. As usual, for a few moments, I'll put the psukim that we're going to analyze, which is only going to be the first three. The Alshich is going to analyze. And this week, and not just the Alshich, I'm going to point to two Rashis, which I think are critical in understanding the concept of Jewish judges. And you'll see it fully, incidentally, in that chapter, although I think the book is out of print. And please don't buy it on Amazon, where people sell my books for literally hundreds of dollars. I'm sure you'll be able to find it somewhere for a decent price. It should cost $25. My translation of Shiur B'toch, Nechov's Levovos, I call it Refuas Alev, which I will sell you for $25, is literally being sold for $700 on Amazon at the moment by people who think it's out of print. They don't know how I reprinted it. So please don't be exploited. Anyway, back to this. So let's, as we normally do, put the psukim we're going to analyze up for a few seconds. We'll read them through. You can take a screenshot if you're watching this and want to carry on watching it live, as it were. And if not, then you can pause and print it out and follow it that way. But it's important, or have the Chumash, of course, in front of you, which will make it easier for you to look at the Alshich's analysis before we look at Rashi and Rabbi Dessler, which is where I would like to go. And then, of course, if you do get hold of that essay, you'll see an even fuller treatment of the concept of Jewish judges and do they ever make mistakes. Okay, so it's time to share the screen, share this, press this, and that worked very well this week. Must remember to do that next week. Okay, here we go. Parshas Shoftim, Shoftim, the Shoftim. You will set up Shoftim, judges, the Shoftim, and officers, that's policemen. Titan L'cho, you will put B'chol Sha'arecha and all your gates, Asher Hashem Elokecha, Noisen L'cho, which the Almighty is giving to you. L'shoftecha for your Shoftim, for your tribes. Each tribe, therefore, has their own judges. A bit, I suppose, just to use an analogy, perhaps a bit like each state in the United States of America, there's federal law and then the state law. So it would seem, although there's no divergence, by the way, when it comes to Torah law, it's just that each state will have their own Supreme Court, and each shevet, each tribe will have their own Supreme Court, their own Beis Din as well. The Shoftes Am Mishpat Tzedek, and they will judge the people Mishpat Tzedek, righteous justice. Lasata Mishpat will not pervert justice, perhaps Lasakiponim will not recognize one person over the other. Lasikach Shochad, they won't take a bribe, Kia Shochad Yabar Eni Chamim, because bribes distort or blind the eyes of the wise, the Salaf David Tzedikim, and pervert the words of Tzedikim. Tzedek Tzedek Tirdaf, you will surely, Tzedek, double expression, but surely pursue justice, Laman Tichia, in order you will live, Virashta Esa Oretz, and inherit the land, which the Lord your God is giving to you. Now, before we get to the Alshich, and I'm sure I've told you this before, because it's a theme the Alshich pursues all the way through his commentary, notice the word noisin, which has now come up twice in these three Pesukim. It's in the present tense. Noisin here and noisin there, which he is giving you. And if I am correct, I don't think it says anywhere in the Torah, Nosan has given you. The land of Israel is never a gift which has been passed from one to the other. Rather, it's an ongoing giving. Okay, that's all we're going to have to look at, although I will be quoting a posuk later on, which we don't need to actually share the screen for. So I'm going to stop the share. Hope you've got your screenshot, you've got your image in front of you, which allows us to go back to the core of our share. And I'll go straight and turn straight to the Alshich and what he has to say here. And just as usual, we will look at the Alshich's analysis first. And as I say here, he's just going to give us very, very important common sense conclusions drawn from that analysis. But let's see what the analysis is and why he thinks the Pesukim, which will lead us to rather him to say why he thinks the Pesukim are written in a specific way. Let's see the specific way. So, Roy Losim Lev, it's appropriate you should be thinking, says the Alshich, Al Omer Lecho. So the first thing to look at, Shoftim V'Shoftim, judges and police officers, Titin Lecho, you will put for you. And surely it should just say, says the Alshich, take out that word Lecho, just say you will appoint. Titin, I suppose, would be appoint. Shoftim V'Shoftim, Titin, that's actually Titin, of course, a French name, but Shoftim V'Shoftim, Titin, you will appoint. What's this point for you? Okay, an extra word there, Lecho. The system is anything that doesn't make sense grammatically, linguistically, bearing in mind the author, the linguist, the grammarian, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, then the real question is, why did he write it in that way? It shouldn't be in that way if it's grammatically wrong, unless Hashem, who doesn't make mistakes like that, is trying to imply something else. So that's exactly what we're looking at here. So question number one, why did it say Titin Lecho? Question number two, Omra Shofta Esa'am, and they will judge Ha'om, the people. And the obvious question there is, who else are they going to judge? You know, not cats and dogs. So that's what judges do, they judge people. Why does it have to say that, therefore? So Shoftim V'Shoftim, Titin Lecho, you will appoint, because you know your gates, Asher Hashem Lekechem Leisaloch, Hashem is giving you the Shoftecha, throughout your tribes, the Shoftes Am, and they will judge the people. Mishpat Tzedek, righteously. So why does it say judge the people? They'll just judge righteously. Obviously, they're judging people. It's not tennis matches, not that sort of judge. Okay, Gimel. Milo Yoda Shaladon Mishpat Tzedek Yitamo. And then it says they will judge righteously. Well, who doesn't know that judges are appointed in order to judge righteously? And then question four, surely when it says at the beginning of the pasuk, you will appoint judges and policemen, officers of the court, that's talking about, well, who's that talking about? It's talking about the people who appoint the judges, isn't it? Look at the pasuk again. Judges and officers, titin lecho, you will appoint. Who will appoint? Not the judges, they don't appoint themselves. They are appointed. It's addressing the appointers, right? The people who appoint judges. Then it says, then it swaps from instead of talking about the appointers to the appointees. Then the posuk then starts talking to the judges themselves and says, "You will v'shofta es am mishpat tzedek," and you will judge the people righteously. So in the posuk, it seems to be changing the focus of who the posuk is addressing. Is addressing the appointers, the appointees, the people? That's the questions which the Alshich asks. Now, there's not too many questions here. There's 10 altogether, but we're going to stop there. So we've got about more or less halfway through, which is far more than we normally get through in the Alshich. And let's have a look at what he says. Now, anybody who's been involved in Jewish communal politics got a very, very bad name. Politics doesn't necessarily have to be bad. However, human nature tends to cause trouble when it comes to political machinations. And so you will certainly know, I think anybody who's involved with synagogues, with communities, Jewish communities. I was for a short while a rabbi of a synagogue, not my cup of tea. I enjoyed it enough, but wanted to do other things. But, you know, my other communal, and even today, communal activities, if you're working with the Jewish people, you know, it's somewhat troublesome. And indeed, to go back to the story I told you at the beginning, that anybody who, this person who was very upset that I had said in the book, anyone who, of course, doesn't read the evidence will naturally find somebody guilty, that this person is very upset with that. And actually, if I did look there, I quote the words of David HaMelech. When David HaMelech says, "Ein tzaddik ba'oretz," there's no such thing as even a tzaddik, a saint in the world, who does right and doesn't make some mistakes. And the Satmar Rav, the Divrei Yoel, says, very similarly to the Alshich, his Sefer, incidentally, not as rigorously as extensively as the Alshich, but uses the same approach. He asks questions. That style, which was 500 years ago in vogue, he resurrected for his wonderful work, the Divrei Yoel, and he says there's an extra word there. In tzaddik, there's no such thing as a tzaddik, a saint, but oretz, in the world, who does good and doesn't do bad. What's this in the world stuff? Where else can a tzaddik be? Just say, ein tzaddik, there's no such thing as tzaddik, who does good and doesn't make mistakes. What's this in the world stuff? So which he says a very, very wise observation. If you're dealing with people, on a communal level, as a rabbi or whatever, then inevitably, even if you don't make mistakes, they'll think you do. In tzaddik ba'oretz, if you're dealing with people in the world, other human beings, it's impossible they won't think you've made mistakes, even if you haven't. Something I do much of the week is to teach individuals and schools, yeshivas, public speaking. And one of the great mistakes that public speakers make, I learned this way back, is that very often the words you're using, what you think you're doing, the idea you think you're conveying, and the words you use to convey those ideas are very often not, when they're decoded or not heard by your audience, they're not hearing what you are trying to convey. Words can often be mistaken. So for the best motives in the world, and indeed maybe you did use the right word, but people hear different things. And of course, as we all know, in today's particularly morally sick world, when words can be seen to have changed meaning or become not acceptable in the blink of an eye. So you might give a talk in 1 week, and by the next week, for giving the exact same talk that was applauded and saluted the week before, you are ostracized and killed for. Anyway, back to this. So let's see what the Alshich says. So we've got the questions, I think. And if I stop going off at tangents, it'll be fresher in your mind. I must try to do that. But let me read to you what the Alshich says. It's not a lot of Alshich we're going to look at, so it won't be too difficult for me to read. I hope it doesn't become too tedious for you. The general rule goes like this. These three psukim that we read at the beginning, they are the first one is addressing the people who do the appointing of the judges, of the rabbis, if you like. Ima Shoftim ve'es Shoftim, the ones who appoint judges and law officers. Vasheni is the second one is addressing the Dayanim. That's what we saw. Vashlish is Heim Bali Hadinim. And the third one of our Pesukim is talking about the people themselves who are involved in the court case. And let's see. And he says, and I'm going to go through each of these three categories one by one. The appointment or the commandment about appointing judges is not something that was only given as a process of only applied and only the princes of the Jewish people were invited to participate in, not at all. And that they appoint the judges to, as it were, carry on the message that the leaders of the Jewish people personify and are passionate about. Because what will happen? No, it's not the case. It normally is the case that the people who are appointing judges are, well, again, it's very common sense. This is very experiential. People who appoint judges in a community, in a Jewish community, tend to be either the most passionate for the community, and therefore they see as their community, and they've got a lot of themselves invested in it, or they're the richest, to be blunt. They're the richest and most powerful people in the community. Well, what if they have appointed a dayan to a position of authority? A beis din, maybe they appointed all the dayanim, and maybe even they pay their salaries. So what happens? Suppose he doesn't listen to what the judge has to say, the finding of the judge, and the judge has to send along the officers of the court, the policemen, to enforce the judgment. But as a oshahu, then that rich person, Yana, will turn around and say, as Azus would express chutzpah. The Yoma said, "Hello, animani." So he's sending judges, he's sending policemen to me. I appointed him. The schnips, he's only is where he is today because of me. That rings a bell with me. There was a certain multi-millionaire businessman who appointed a very, very well-known English rabbi on the assumption that he would be able to bend him to his agenda, which was to move Anglo-Jewish orthodoxy far to the left. Remember, British Jews, 85% or so, are Orthodox by shul membership. So that's very, very important. They may not be particularly religious necessarily, but the rules that they don't keep are Orthodox rules. In other words, I mean, this is the great comparison between the Orthodox family and the Reform family who drive to shul on Shabbos. The Reform family claim hypocrisy from the Orthodox family, who drive the same as we do, but we park in the car park outside the shul, you park around the corner, pretending you haven't driven to shul, carrying your tallis bag under your arm. We quite openly park and drive in Shabbos. But there is if you forgive me saying, hooray for hypocrisy. The hypocrite, at least in sticking his kids in the back of the car and parking around the corner, invites the kids to question his hypocrisy. He's making a statement. By parking around the corner, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm doing something which is essentially wrong. Why am I doing that? Well, it's not for me, and I'm not that sugar from, etc., etc. But at least it's exposing his children to the understanding that there is an alternative view, that he is doing something which he recognizes is not quite right. It may be right for him, but it's still not right. The Reform family, the children sitting in the back, are simply denied the opportunity to realize that they're doing something wrong because the father doesn't think he's doing something wrong. The other one does. So there's always a tension going on there when it comes to hypocrisy, that you can almost say hooray for hypocrisy. When it comes to the person, I was telling you, so this person had the rabbi would not conform to what he thought he was appointing him to do, which to move an Anglo Jewry, which is 85% Orthodox, at least by shul membership, far to the left into what we'd say in America as being conservative. Then he attacked him publicly in the press, demanding and pointing out. It's interesting when the Alshich says that such a person, well, what was his phrase? Yana Azus would reply with chutzpah. Well, this multi-billionaire wrote a letter to the national Jewish newspaper of the UK, pointing out with chutzpah that he had got him the job. I got this man the job, and he's not doing what I'm telling him. I think he should resign. Really, he did not resign. Anyway, but that phenomenon is sadly not uncommon. The person doing the appointing expects effectively the rabbi or Dayan perhaps to sing, sing his tune or to dance to his tune. And if he doesn't do the dancing, then there can be a little bit of tension there. The Pasuk is telling you that mustn't be your perspective. Let's see. Simas ayin gemul hu mishalem ki yishtar lo olai. This is his chorus atoiv. This is his gratitude to me for getting the job, for appointing him. That this is how he repays me, sending officers of the court to take my money because he says that I owe it when I don't think I do, etc. And the office of the court, who pays their salaries? Me. Again, therefore, so therefore, in the first pasuk, which is addressing, as the Alshich just said, the appointers of Rabbonim Dayanim, then it's they who have to take. That's why it says Shoftim titin lecho. Appoint for yourself. Appoint them to be over you, just that they're going to be over anybody else. So that's the first thing. Common sense. You must, when communities go wrong, as the Alshich says other places, whose fault is it? Is it the Rabbonim? Is it the ordinary people? Or is it the Yiddish word is machers, the activists in the community? Well, the rabbis are only appointed by the activists, so it's bad rabbis, bad dayanim, and that was the fault of the activists. The ordinary people, we tend to keep out of this. It's the people who do the appointing. So they carry the blame, but we'll see in a second in the Alshich, they also carry the honor, the kavod, and the success of the Jewish people if they get this right. If it's they appoint them for not just over the people, but for them too, right? I accept that in appointing this judge, he will, and I want him to behave with independence, and that independence extends even if I do something wrong. So therefore he says, and they're bringing out a star rather against me. No, I appointed them. No, that shouldn't be your attitude. Okay, that's why it's addressing the people who do the appointing. That's what with the extra word lecho. That was our first question. Why to say titin lecho? Should I say titin? No, there's another message going on there. The Torah is telling us, if you ever get to the stage where you're doing the appointing, then at that point you turn around and say, he's the boss. Right? I've appointed him to go on with the job. He's the boss. Then the appointment has to be for you as well. So the word lecha is like for yourself. That he's willing to accept that the court will act independently, and that independence may find him guilty. He'll accept that the judgment of the court. And then the Alshich says something which I think is absolutely fabulous. The Yiur Shoftim b'Shoftim b'chol sha'arecha. Now the pasuk, our pasuk says, this is not a question we raised before, that the Shoftim have to be in all of the gates, each of the cities of the Jewish people. And again, let's notice the word noisin in the present tense. Shehu b'chol ir. So that means to say, in every city there is an expectation, not an expectation, there's a command. There's a demand from the Torah that there should be law courts and bati din b'dayanim in every case. Justice can't be. Sometimes you had judges who would travel, at least in England, in medieval England, from place to place, setting up courts. But there should be constant justice as far as the Torah is concerned. There should be a constant based in every court. But when it says which I am giving, that goes back to this idea of the land of Israel being given, right, or being giving. It's being something which is being given. That is to say, when you're in the land of Israel, it's already been given to you. You've already taken possession of the land of Israel. You've already got these cities. But it's still as though it's saying, Adayin matonas sha'arecha hevia im tasat siva. It's still in the present tense, I am giving, because it's an ongoing process of giving. And the ongoing process of giving, I will keep on giving it to you. It's a lease. in crude terms, the land of Israel is leased to the Jewish people, as it says in the second paragraph of the Shema, and it will be, if you keep my laws, fine, you get to stay there and everything will be great. But if you don't, then you can be thrown out. It's never given. It never was given. It's being given. So therefore, as it's being given, then it will be, even though you might have it, bear in mind that if you obey this command and make sure you've got kosher judges, then that in and of itself is going to keep you there. And that's something I want to bring Rashi, interrupt the Alshich, if you'll forgive me, and just point this out to Rashi, what Rashi says here. Remember, it's to appoint kosher judges, not just for you, but for everybody. And Rashi says at the end of that pasuk, if you look at your screenshot, and pasuk, the third one, tzedek tzedek tirdoif, you should always pursue justice. In order you will inherit the land, Asher Hashem Hashem is giving to you. Again, it's giving. That the third one, remember, he's talking about, that's the people. So the first one is the Dayanim, is the appointers of the Dayanim. That's why it's addressing them. Second one is Dayanim itself, telling them what to do, judge right. And the people themselves have to seek that sort of justice. And Rashi says here a very, very important thing of Mishpat Tzedek, if I can find this. So this is Pasuk Emo. Let me just see this. Oh, he says, Mino dayonim mumchim v'tzadikim lishpat tzedek. Appoint for yourself judges who are expert and tzadikim for yourself. That's what that means, says Rashi. Now, the implication of that is, I once tried to publish this in one of my newspapers, and the editor was not happy, but it is a Rashi. Only common sense would point out that if the posuk tells you to pursue good judges, by definition, there are not good judges. When the posuk demands that you pursue good batidin, then by the implication, there are bad batidin. It's a simply common sense. Jewish history is full of stories of such batidin. After all, there was a fellow called Doeg, and Doeg was the greatest halachic authority from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu to his own time. He was the head of the Sanhedrin and the head of the Beis Din of Shaul HaMelech. Yet he was a very nasty piece of work. His history it hardly glows. So there is a possibility of getting bad judgment from bad judges and bad Beis Din. Don't do that, says the Pasuk. Go for judges who are good. Let me read a little bit more to you of the Alshich. But there are in Titan Shoftim Shiftecha. So therefore, this is very exciting. That's to say that it will be that if you appoint kosher judges, then if you don't, then the gift stops. It's a lease. The appointment of kosher judges in and of itself is enough to keep the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. We'll see that shortly. So as long as you perform this, throughout the land of Israel, that in and of itself is enough for you to keep in the land of Israel. It's an idea that's very important. We'll come back to this in a second. I go back to reading a bit further, but there and indeed, if you appoint judges throughout your courts, throughout your cities, and throughout your various tribal areas, mini states that make up the federation that was the United States of Israel, I suppose you could call it, of Klal Yisrael. Then as long as that is the case, then that's going to be good, as we said. However, there's another thing here. The Pasuk says they will judge the people. And we said, well, of course they'll judge the people. That's the question that we ask. Who else are they going to judge? And the answer is, you might think that judges are the role of, let's say, Shevet Shimon, the tribe of Shimon, and their judge is to judge the tribe of Shimon. And the tribe of Yehuda, the judges of Yehuda will deal with citizens of the state, the constituent state of the United States of Israel from Yehuda. But that's not the case. It's because according for you l'shoftecha, the shofta is am, but no, they won't judge your people, they'll judge the people. There must be equal judgment. Don't think, you must not in any way say, oh, he's the same sort of Jew as me, from the tribe of Yehuda, from a tribe Yisachar is Zvulun, and therefore he's going to be. I'm going to be on his side. That can't possibly be the case. And of course, I mean, today, suppose you found yourself in front of a Beis Din when you were taking I pluck this completely out of the air, let's say a Belza Chassid. I'm a big admirer of Belza Chassidim, by the way. But I just use it as an example. You can put that in there or replace that category however you like. You're, like me, a Litvisha, the yeshiva man, and this is the fellow you're going to court with is Belza Chassid, and you're in a Belz Beis Din. Might you not suspect that they will favor him? The Torah says it must never be the case that you show any favor towards the sort of Jews who are like you, in this case, that they come from the same tribe as you. Rather, even though in each tribe and in each city, the cities of those tribes, there will be Batidin, they judge Ha'om, they judge the people properly. And let's jump down to another little bit of Alshich, which I think is very, very exciting. And he says the following thing: it says for you and your people twice. The question we didn't ask. We get two lachos. What's the two lachos? He's telling the people who are doing the appointing of the judges, you will appoint judges for yourself, as we explained. Bring them over you. You'll accept it if they rule that you've got to be fined and lose money. That's why I'll consider it to be lecha l'shivtecha, the second lecha. I'll consider it to be you, that they are your tribe. Why? And your shorim, your gates, your cities. The fact that you appointed kosher judges who would pursue justice, who would not favor one over the other, and you'd be willing to accept that upon yourself, that's good enough for the land of Israel to be called your land. You are a key figure that allows the Jewish people to live in the land of Israel. And that's what I said before, that when Rashi, the Alshich mentioned, that the appointment of kosher judges in and of itself, that Mina Dayana Makasherim, the appointment of kosher judges, is enough to keep the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. So if the Jewish people are keeping the laws, second paragraph of the Shema, we get to live in the land of Israel, but they'll only keep the laws if the judges are honest, straight, etc., who don't show favoritism to the ruling elites and to the powerful. And if you are one of the powerful ruling elite who makes sure that that is the case, then the whole system of the Torah's laws being respected and carried out by kosher judges and kosher batidin is you. You're the architect of that. You made sure that you got the best. You made sure the Beis Din was straight. You made sure that you accepted their judgment. And that's that. So far, so good with the Alshich. However, there is something I wanted to go back to Rashi from, and that's in Posuk 9. I didn't share this on screen, but I can read it to you anyway. And it's not too long, but it's another very important Rashi. Bosa Elokanim says, talking here, well, I'll read Posuk Ches and Tes. If there is a case, whether it is a financial case or a criminal case, perhaps a murder case, and you don't know exactly what the halacha is, what should you do? Posuk Tes tells us. Then what you should do is also el hakavanim. You come to the kavanim, halavim, to the levim, belashafet, to the judges, or the judge asher yeh b'yomim ahim, that are in those days. But the roshta hativ and the roshta, sorry, it's not hativ, but the roshta they will inquire, they will do the legal process, and they'll tell you esadavar mishpat, what the ruling is. And this is very, very interesting. First of all, the Talmud makes a comparison here. It says the Kohanim and Levim and the judges. You'll take it the Kohanim and Levim and judges, and the seems a bit surely we just take it to judge, it was the Cohen Levim, and it's saying that the authority of the Sanhedrin to give a capital punishment only applies when there are Kohanim and Levim working in the Beis Hamikdash. So it's time-stamped. Only the authority to give the death penalty only applies then. Now, there's a lot to say about that in Allah. I'm not going to go into that point, but I do want to quote to you what Rashi says. Rashi says something which I think is hugely important, and in fact very important. And he says the following thing. To the judges that are in those days. What does that mean? You will bring them to the judges that are in those days. This is what Rashi says. Maybe even if the judges of your time are not quite as great as previous judges, the fun of like the ones who came before them, you've still got to listen to what he says. Why? There are nobody else except the judges of your days. And elsewhere in the Chumash, Rashi says it's the ways of fools to turn around and say, call him a judge, call that a dayan, that's the rabbi. Ha! Think of the Vilna Gaon, that was a rabbi. Think of the Chofetz Chaim. Think of, and you can just fill in the names yourself as you move along. Well, the Rashi says it's stupidity. I once was speaking in one of my favorite yeshivas in the world, Medrash Shmuel in Yerushalayim. I had the great privilege of speaking to the whole yeshiva several times. And once I was there, and I made the point. I quoted this and said, Rashi is basically saying, there is no app called, hashtag dead Gedolim. You can't ask the dead. But more than that, when Rashi is insisting you go to the judges, or the posuk is insisting, which Rashi is explaining, you go to the judges of your time, the only ones who get you, get me, get us, are the judges of our time. And I've seen it in Sorim mentioned that the Dayanim, when you go to the Beis Din Shemala, the people who sit in judgment of you are the Dayanim of your time. Sorry, the greats, the Gedolim and Dayanim of your own time. Because only they understand your own time. There's a famous Gemara in this in Kaf Gimel and Tanis about Choni Hamagel, who slept for 70 years. Obviously, generations had passed by the time he wakes up. And he goes to the base of Medrash, and first of all, his family are all dead. All that, his generation are dead. He's got great grandchildren, but they don't recognize them as the great-grandfather. He goes to the base of Medrash, and he's the star. I mean, he's answering all the questions they can't solve themselves. And he said, and they say to him, "Well, we've not such clarity since Choni Hamagel lived." And they said, "Well, I'm Choni Hamagel," and they just laugh at him. And eventually, he says, because they wouldn't give him COVID, and then he asked Hashem, and this is the famous Gemara, I need a chevra, I need friends, I need a society in which I can work, or give me death. In other words, he was out of time. It wasn't COVID as an honor. It was they don't get me. What do you mean they don't get me? They're not giving me honor. He just answered all the questions. If he was the greatest rabbi of his generation in a previous generation, Kal V'chomer, how much more so is the greatest rabbi of his generation in a later generation where the people are weaker intellectually in their Torah, Masara, etc. And the answer is yes, he's greater, but he's out of time. His approach, the realities of his experience that led him to be appropriate for when he was born is no longer appropriate in a different time and a different generation. It's a mistake very often that parents make, teachers make. Techniques that worked when you were a child might well, and probably in fact, will not work necessarily as well or well at all, or maybe not at all, for the next generation. The rabbis who are sent, the Gedolim, the great rabbis, I'm not talking about myself, the great rabbis that are sent in a generation are sent to the generation because they match, understand, and get the generation. That's why they can judge you when they get upstairs. But Dayanim from a different time, and every generation, every epoch's got its own challenges. So the Jewish people are sent equipped to pass those challenges, and part of the equipment they're sent to do that are the greats, the leaders of the generation, who will be able to steer them through that particular sea and storm. But that skill that could get them through the 17th century, 16th, 14th, the expulsion from Spain or England or all these places, etc. That is people uniquely tailored, giants tailored for a generation, and its challenges. So Rashi says, you go to the greats of your generation, and it's a way of fools turn around and say, they're no good compared to the previous generation. Fool, they're perfect for your generation, perfectly selected. Does that mean that they don't make mistakes? No such thing. Does that mean that there won't be scoundrels hiding amongst rabbis in every generation, even corrupt Beis-Dins? Rashi says there will be. But your job is to select the best. But there is another important factor in Parshas Shoftim, which I wanted to focus on, and that is when it says you must not accept a bribe. There's a Rabbi Dessler here, which I think is worthy of our intellect. That'll take us back to our story at the top of the Shiur, and that will leave us free for next week. Rabbi Dessler, in his wonderful essay, you'll find it as a Celtic Aleph in page 52, and it's called Mabata Emes, the perspective of truth, seeing the truth, an objective analysis of the truth. And he points out that an objective analysis of the truth is impossible unless you've got an objective person. And to find an objective person is an extremely rare thing. To be able to factor out our own feelings, emotions, prejudices in anything is an extraordinarily rare thing to do. So let me read to you what he says here. Of course, the Pasuk says in our Sedri, judge must not take a bribe. How much? What constitutes a bribe? Which will blind, as we saw, the eyes, make the eyes of the judge incapable of seeing the truth. Then even the smallest amount can blind the eyes of the greatest intellect. And he brings a famous Gemara. There was a rabbi called Rishon bar Rabbi Yossi, and he had an oris. An oris is a tenant farmer. That is to say, imagine I have some property. Let's say I've got some land, 50 acres of farmland, and I'm too busy doing the Alshich every week to actually farm the land. Although we do have a little vegetable patch in our garden. This year we grew tomatoes, potatoes, green beans, and carrots. I just thought I would show off, but my wife did most of the work. It's really her project, but never mind. But suppose instead of having a box, which I think is 2 yards wide and 2 yards, a square box, 2 yards square, growing these things, we've got 2 of those. Suppose instead I've got 50 acres. I have no time to work this. So I go and I find you and say, look, what are you doing at the moment? Well, you just made unemployed because of COVID. So, well, look, I've got a proposition for you. I have this land which is producing nothing, but it's fertile soil and could be producing a lot of crops and a lot of money for us. You could take my 2 yards, my yard square, my 2 boxes, 1 yard square, and instead of just tomatoes and peas, carrots and potatoes, we could be producing, for one family, tons. We can make a fortune. So here's my deal, or here's my proposition to you. You don't have any job, but you've got all the time in the world. I don't have any time in the world. So guess what? How about if you become my oris? I will give you a percentage, which we'll agree upon. 50-50, 60-40, whatever it is. Of the produce of the land goes to you. The other percentage goes to me. And that's a win-win for both. I, who don't have the time to do it myself, I'm getting a percentage of it as though I'd done it myself. You have got no land. You are now earning as though you had that land. It's a win-win. That arrangement's called an oris in Hebrew. And this rabbi, Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi Yossi, had an oris, aleph resh samach vov, oris. And he worked his land. Part of the agreement was that every Erev Shabbos on a Friday, he would bring a basket of the fruits or the produce of the land, whether it was tomatoes, let's not go into that song, potatoes, oh, I can't stop it. He would bring a basket of the harvest for the rabbi to have at his Shabbos table every week. The Gemara says, one particular week, he was going to a court case, a deen Torah, against somebody in town. And as he was going to be passing on Thursday, because Beis-Din's court cases, we talked about every city there's a court case, it's our court, and then the court cases are heard on Mondays and Thursdays, the market days when people are coming into town. And so why trouble myself to go back and deliver it on the Friday? I'll just bring the basket a day early. So he brought it to the rabbi's door, Rabbi Rabbi Yossi, who was one of the Dayanim, one of the Rabbonim who would be hearing the case. And when he saw that the fellow had brought him the basket a day early, he refused to accept the basket. Not only did he refuse to accept the basket, he refused to judge the case and disqualified himself from being one of the judges. Later that day, he was in town and he walked past the courtroom rather, and he could hear through the windows the arguments being made, which is a very noisy affair in Jewish law, by the way. And as he listened to the case being heard, he consistently found himself finding in favor of his tenant farmer, the fellow he had this arrangement with. On closer analysis, he came to the conclusion that his prejudice in favor of the Oris's version of events was indeed because of the benefit he had from the fact he wanted to deliver the fruit a day early. And he made a series of calm comments. He said, look at me. Had I accepted the fruit, it was my fruit. It was my stuff. I owned it. It wasn't giving me anything. It was mine. And I didn't accept it. And not only that, I disqualified myself from the case. But if it was my fruit and I didn't accept it, and it was prejudicing me from not being able to see the truth properly, how much more so are people who actually take a bribe, even the smallest bribe, not able to see the truth? And a bribe needn't necessarily be a coin or a banknote or a check. It can be, a promise or a subconscious promise of, if I find in favor of this person, maybe in the future he'll be able to do me a good turn, etc. It's a bigger thing. Or maybe if I find in favor of the truth, that will sit uncomfortably with me because I've been ignoring that truth up till now because of something else that I wanted personally out of this. To be able to find judges who are so sensitive to that degree, that would be very rare. And so if I go back to the book I started with, let me read to you what Rabbi Chonan Wasserman, Zecher Tzadik Kodesh Livracha, who was killed by the Nazis in the Kovna Ghetto, says in Kodesh Memoriam in page 14. When it comes to judging matters which could produce an outcome that differs from what the judge wants the conclusion to be, the Torah is telling he's simply unable to judge honestly. That tiny, even microscopic amount of bias will have an effect. Judging the truth can only be achieved by those who free themselves from all the base desires and concerns of this world. Now, living today in the United States of America, where judges are appointed on the basis of their political affiliation, an appalling situation. That doesn't apply in England. However, I've got plenty of lawyer friends there who say, don't think for 1 minute that judges in England in court cases are in any way clear of bias. I remember my Rosh Hashiva, Reb Leib Gurovitz, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the Rosh Hashiva Gateshead. I just looked up at his pictures on my wall. One of my great teachers. Reb Leib Gurovitz was once somebody in Gateshead said there was a fellow who was convicted in Newcastle, which is the city across the river, Gateshead separated by the River Tyne from the city of Newcastle upon Tyne. Somebody in the community was convicted of something. I think it was some sexual misdemeanor. And somebody said, "Wow, terrible," he said to somebody in the community in Gateshead. To which Reb Leib Gurovitz said, "You can't say that. He was not convicted in a Beis Din. It was a non-Jewish court. Would I allow him to be alone in a room with my daughter?" said the Rosh Hashiva. Absolutely not. But that's very different to assuming that because a non-Jewish court room said the person is guilty, that he is guilty. Because from our point of view, tzedek tiered off judges who are tzaddikim, judges who are trying their best to be free from bias. That doesn't exist in the world. So let me continue with Rabbi Chonan. Judging the truth can only be achieved by those who free themselves from all their base desires and concerns of this world. Not interested in politics, not interested in power, not interested in promotion, not interested in their own personal agenda. Judges such as this you will not find in any other society, except amongst the Kadoshim of the Chacham Yisrael, who are like the Malachi Elokim. And that's why, if you don't know what the halakha is, you go to the Dayanim of your time. Oh, you might want to say that these, unless you're contradicting Rashi and Rabbi Chana Bassaman, are not like Malachi Elikim. Oh, you're saying that, yeah, they are like Malachi Elikim, they're like angels of God, but not as angel-like as the angels of previous generations. I think you'd have to be an angel to be able to judge objectively other angels. Where will you find that level of objectivity? I honestly think you'll only find that Klal Yisrael. Does that mean to say that Klal Yisrael is perfect? No. That means to say that judges are perfect? I've already told you. Some are not. Some are far from it. Some Batidin are corrupt. So says Rashi. Always look for a good Beis Din. There are bad Batidin. Having said all that, once you have engaged in the process of finding them or looking for them, you'll find them in Klal Yisrael. You find the good ones. You find the good Batidin. And there'll be a level of goodness which is utterly alien to legal systems, which you'll find elsewhere. Finding that, establishing that in Klal Yisrael, is enough to keep the Jewish people fulfilling the conditions of the lease and living in the land of Israel, which is constantly being given to Klal Yisrael. King Yirbu, that should continue so. We should have more dialogue like that in Klal Yisrael. Less doctors who don't read people's books and come to conclusions. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful Shabbos.